Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm the GCSE science teacher. In today's video, we're going to be learning about variation and evolution for GCSE biology. I hope you guys do find this helpful and useful. This is part of a bigger topic which I will continue to make videos on. So selective breeding, genetic engineering, cloning, all those types of things will be discussed later on my channel. So definitely feel free to subscribe, click the bell so you get notified. And if you do have any questions or queries, you can always comment them down below. I'm also going to put some resources of extra reading in the description box if you are interested to learn more about this topic as well in the meantime. And thank you so much to everybody who has commented, shared my videos, liked the videos, and just subscribed and just been really supportive. It's really great to see that, and I do really appreciate it. So thank you ever so much. Let's get started. Let's talk about this. And before we, jump straight into the details, let's just define the keyword of variation, because variation just essentially means the differences within our genotype, which essentially causes differences within our phenotype. Genotype is just our genes, our genetics, our DNA, and the phenotype is our physical features, the physicality based on those genes. Now, the thing is, with our phenotype, this can actually be altered as well by our own influence, not just our genes. So what do I mean by this? Well, you may have heard of the nature versus nurture debate. And if you haven't, don't worry, because all it means is a long time, scientists have been debating and discussing and coming up with ideas whether our physical features as humans, or even other species as well, is based solely upon our genetics, our nature, or if it was mainly due to our influence externally. So is it our nurture, how we nurture ourselves, what we do as we grow up and into adolescence? And there's kind of a medium ground here. Both have an influence, definitely, for sure. And actually, there's some twin studies that actually show that a lot of the time, twins, even if they are separated at birth, they still go on to actually look identical. If they're obviously identical twins, they will have the same height, they'll have the same weight, they will often have the same haircuts and things like that. So choices, even in a nurture sense, are the same. Which kind of fueled this idea that, to be honest, nature's very much a big predicting factor in how we will end up. So here are some examples of different types of variation amongst humans. There's variation amongst eye colour, there's different categories of eye colour. Of course, there's a lot of different variations within even just blue eyes. There's lots of versions of that. And this is all to do with the pigmentation, the melanocytes that are found within our eyes. So the pigmented cells, if you will, that are found there. We also have our earlobes, if they're detached or attached. This is a genetic trait. Blood group as well. Blood group's quite an interesting one, because actually at the minute on this channel, we've mainly discussed two alleles being inherited, but actually there are three different alleles. You can see here A, B, and O that can be inherited from both biological parents, and this will determine the blood group. You also have positive blood groups, don't you? So A positive, B negative, that kind of thing, and that is due to the proteins that are found on the surface of the red blood cell. And also skin color. Now, skin color is an interesting one because, of course, variation amongst individuals, of course, we know there are very pale people, much darker skin tones as well. However, this can definitely change due to the environment. If someone's exposed to a lot of sunlight, they can tan. However, that's more of a protective mechanism for your skin. If someone does tan, it's not, it kind of indicates skin damage from UV rays. People who have very, very, very pale skin often won't tan. And this is, again, due to the melanocytes, the pigmented cells, and the quantity of those in the skin. So someone's skin color is going to really stay the same throughout their entire life. Even if they are exposed to colder climates or warmer climates, there may be a slight fluctuation, but for the most part, that is pretty much set in stone. But yeah, variation examples, these are the key ones that they often ask about. So I know I've specifically spoken about humans, but of course we know there are other species, not just humans. There are loads of animals, plants, bacteria, prokaryotic cells, all this type of thing, loads of organisms that have variation amongst them. And because of that variation, those organisms are able to pass on their genes and thrive in different environments. Remember, variation is the differences within our genes, but the reason for that difference and why it's such a beneficial thing is because those different genes can actually be beneficial to different environments. And that's why, for example, humans have been able to migrate across different climates in the world. And it's the same with other species. Birds are a fantastic example. They are able to fly around the world to different climates, and we have such a wide variety of birds. If you look at things like a peacock to a sparrow to a kiwi to a pigeon, even, they're so vastly different. Their variation is wild. And it's the same with dogs, domestic dogs specifically. You've got a chihuahua that's really tiny all the way up to a Great Dane that's huge, but they're of the same species. This is what we call a breed, a different version of a species, if you will. Often breeds can't necessarily have offspring together. And that may be due to more of a physicality thing. So some animals, like a chihuahua, for example, might not be able to have a baby Great Dane because of the size of the chihuahua. But they are the same species. So just to clarify what the word species means, it's just when there are individuals that can have offspring that are fertile. And that just means if they have a child, that child can then have a child, and so on. So those genes can be passed on. Remember, there are examples of organisms like hybrid organisms that can't actually have fertile offspring, such as a zorse, which is a zebra and a horse that have had a zorse, and you've just essentially combined those genes, but that organism can no longer, it's not fertile, it can no longer have its own individual offspring. So that is not a species of its own, and that just clarifies that definition there for you. I did want to just run through some of the data that you could see. And this was a question a while back on one of the GCSE papers, and it was asking about categorical and also continuous data, although it didn't necessarily state those two types. They showed you a bar graph, like a bar chart like you see here, but also a line graph, which often you are really asked to plot. And they asked you to kind of suggest why they were displayed in different ways. Just to help us understand this with the maths for science element to this part, is categorical data is really talking about categories of data. Okay, so a bar chart is going to be used in this case. So a lot of the time, a bar chart will have set categories like, you know, eye color, or sex, boy or girl, or it could be petal color if we're talking about flowers. They're set bits of data, and often you'll see this as literally written along the x-axis. So that's a key indicator. If you see words along the x-axis, you know to yourself, it's going to be a bar chart. In the case of a line graph or a scatter graph, this is more of a continuous piece of data, because what's happening is you're drawing your graph on a continuous scale, and this will be shown through a line graph. I would just like to say at this point, in science, specifically biology and chemistry, and physics as well, if you ever get asked to draw a line graph, please don't feel as though you have to use a ruler unless it's very clear that it's a nice straight line. If it's not, if it's more of a curve shape, go with the flow of the data. That's my advice to you, okay? Because I think in maths, a lot of the time you're expected to use a ruler. In science, if the data's showing a nice curve, please just draw a curve. That is one of the things I constantly see. I don't want you guys to miss out on key marks, okay? I might do a whole video actually on graphs and how to draw them. If you would like that video, please just let me know and I will make that for you guys. Anyway, the other thing to mention is this idea of the spread of data, or a bell-shaped curve. And this is what you're seeing on the screen right now. So this kind of up and then down motion is what we call a bell-shaped curve. And this just shows you the spread of the data from the most extreme to the average to the other side of the extreme as well. And this is a really nice way to kind of look at the proportion of individuals, or the averages really as well. So some examples of continuous data include things like height, because there is such a continuum of height. You've got the smallest person in the world all the way to the tallest person in the world, and most people fall within that middle range. Weight, again, is the same kind of thing. BMI is a strange one, because BMI could actually be considered categorical because there's specific categories. But if you are going off like individual numbers, then you could maybe do it on a line graph. It depends how you collect that data. Leaf size, wingspan, these are all other examples in a non-human sense. So let's talk about evolution. Now, evolution is this idea that all life on Earth, whether it's a human, a plant, an animal, everything originated from species before it that were more simple life forms. And we all actually originated from something called LUCA, which stands for Last Universal Common Ancestor, which originated around 3.6 billion years ago. Now, we don't really know what this organism looked like, because obviously we weren't there to take a picture of it and show it to people now. But we think that happened because if we go back and we track all the way back to the organisms that we do know about, so the dinosaurs, we know that those have evolved. So birds now have evolved from those life forms. It's the same with other species as well, and even with humans as well. We can actually use fossil records, bones, and other bits of data to kind of piece together the history of life on Earth. And that's given us this indication that simpler life forms originated on Earth, and then they started to develop. As the environment changed, they started to change as well, and their genes really dictated that. Now, there was some debate many, many years ago amongst scientists how this really happened. So there were scientists like Lamarck who thought that if an organism wanted to change its physical appearance, its phenotype, it literally could just decide and then change it in the moment in its own lifetime. However, this was disputed by other scientists, and then there was a big discovery, or a big theory, if you will, by an individual called Darwin. Now, you've probably heard of Darwin in everyday life because he's kind of a big deal. Darwin is a scientist who came up with this idea of natural selection. And natural selection just tells us that an individual species can change and evolve over time. And the best adapted to its environment will actually survive, pass on its genes, and reproduce. And that gene will become more popular or more prevalent in the next generation and continue to be passed down. Now, this can be a positive thing because obviously life will need certain genes. Some organisms will need certain genes for that environment. But as we know, our climate, our environment is changing all the time, especially with the effects of climate change. So can evolution keep up with that? That is a question that we don't know as scientists at the moment. But it is something to think about. Now, how can we prove this? Because obviously I'm telling you this information. You might be thinking, okay, but prove it. How do we know this? Why did they come to that conclusion? And I love that energy. It's good to question things for sure. So how do they know this? Well, we know this from fossil records, from bone records, of course, like I say. However, we also can use this idea of the peppered moth. So you may have heard of this. This is often asked about in the exam, but if you haven't, don't worry, because I'm going to run through it now. So the light peppered moth is this moth you see here, or might not be able to see, depending. If you look on the left-hand side, you've got a tree that has kind of this mottled color. So you've got white bark and brown parts to it. This is what we call lichens on the tree. This is just kind of like a moss type structure. And essentially, the light peppered moth camouflaged itself. So it wasn't easily seen by predators like birds from up above in the sky. And that meant that those types of moths actually survived longer than their black moth counterparts. Birds would often eat the black moths because they could see them easily. So that meant that the population of light peppered moths increased, whereas the population of black moths decreased. And that meant that the light peppered moths were better adapted to the environment. They survived, they passed on their genes to the offspring. So more light peppered moths existed. Now, this happened before the 19th century, before the Industrial Revolution. Now, if you have heard anything about the Industrial Revolution, you'll know that there was a lot of pollution. Fossil fuels were being burnt to kind of push on with industry. And this pollution really caused a lot of smog in the area. Now, that smog can attach to things, so like the tree bark, for example, and the tree bark started to turn like a dark brown, dark black color. Now, this made the light peppered moths really easily visible to all those predators they were trying to avoid and were doing so well at avoiding. However, the black peppered moth, or the black moth itself, was camouflage now. So the ones that did survive actually were able to hide and camouflage now. And that meant that their population increased, whereas the light peppered moths started to decrease. And this shows you a really good way of seeing natural selection and evolution. Natural selection literally means that you're naturally selecting what organisms survive and which ones don't, which comes on to the next video of artificial selection, or selective breeding, as it's sometimes known of as well, where we as humans have actually selected particular species characteristics to make more of those characteristics pronounced. And there are some ethical kind of considerations to go with this. So that will be the next video. I hope you guys find this helpful. And that's it from me today. I've been the GCSE science teacher and you have been curious. If you did enjoy this video, feel free to give it a thumbs up. Do also subscribe if you haven't already. It'd be great to have you as part of our community. I post videos every Sunday at 12 noon UK time. So if you would like to get notified and you don't want to miss out, do subscribe and click the bell. And thank you so much to everyone who already has. I really do appreciate it. If you want more videos from me, do feel free to click on the ones on the side here. I have loads of biology, chemistry and physics GCSE GCSE revision on my channel in playlists, so feel free to enjoy those. And if you'd like other revision or support, or you want to see this content in a different format, feel free to check out my TikTok and Instagram. Everything's at the GCSE Science Teacher. Have a great day, take care, and I'll see you in the next one.